I'm so happy to have you here, sister. I feel like you're going to wrap this night off real strong for us.
Let's see, man. Anytime I do a speaking engagement, I just say, listen, God, I am your microphone. I am the vessel. I am the conduit. So let's see what the message is from source.
Great. Great. Well, again, reminder for anyone who has just joined to put this into speaker view over gallery view so we can zoom in on that beautiful face. Tracy, why did you pick this topic? Is it, because you care about the body, or is it, why did this come up when it comes to safety?
Okay, so when I really started deeply journeying into my spiritual path, I realized that I split the spirit, the mind, body into threes. I didn't look at them as integrated. And because I had such a passion for the spirit, I kind of over-indexed on it. And so I neglected my body because I was just over the human experience. Now, not in this like suicidal way, but just in a way where I was like, nah, like, you know who's hotter than a woman? Soul. That's how I looked at it. And then, because to me, my kind of personal, how should I put this? What allowed my scale for balance is all dependent on if I'm doing something excessively, right? Because anything can turn into a weapon, even if it appears to be for good, If I just put so much focus on it, like for instance, I was mentioning this on my debut podcast episode for the return, and I say how being a Scorpio, I have a tendency to be a very deep sea diver, but I had to remind myself that the surface is okay because that's where the oxygen is at, Because even if we keep going deep as humans, there is a level where your lungs just do not have the capacity to survive. And so for anyone who's new to me, like my primary language is analogies. That's how I understand life. And so that's what I mean by excess. And I started realizing, Tracy, like your spirit has been poured into a body on purpose. So if I'm going to look at God as the GOAT creative designer of the universe, then why am I disrespecting a piece of art called the body? Right? And so, especially when I started learning how much disease can be impacted by our thoughts, right? How much neglecting the body can then contaminate our thoughts. They both work like simultaneously in a sense. And because oftentimes we study them as separate entities, we miss out on an opportunity, I think, to heal in some ways an easier way than it appears. Not always, but I'll give you an example. Like sometimes I don't have anxiety because, I need to have 5 sessions back to back with Vienna. It's because, bitch, you haven't gotten vitamin D. Like, go outside. Or I have to ask myself, whoa, what have I been eating? Maybe I have been consuming like too much alcohol. You know what I mean? Like literally just had this conversation with myself yesterday because I didn't catch myself in the moment, but I caught it like right after the moment where I was a little, just felt, that very, it's a casual tug of stress, but because I had extra lemon juice in my little freaking, glass, I was like, oh, I can make myself a paper plane right now, real quick. 1 cocktail, my fancy ass coupe glass, because it doesn't look like an issue, because when we think about someone having challenges with alcohol, and I know I'm bouncing around all these places, but this is just my personal conversation. It was like, oh, there's no reason why I should look at this as negative, having this one drink right now, because you're not surrounded by beer cans. You know what I mean? Or I'll think like a challenge with alcohol is if I'm just taking, you know, a glass of Henny to the head. But having an awareness with my body makes me realize, no, Tracy, you were self-medicating right now. And my body like reacted viscerally. Maybe I'm being a little bit dramatic with that word, but it reacted. It reacted. And what happened? I started losing my focus. Fatigue started arriving with the swiftness. You know what I mean? All because I was just like, I don't want to feel. But when I don't want to feel, when I mute my body, I disengage with its communication, I basically take away the opportunity to collect data.
Ooh.
Because in my opinion, women, for the most part with us, when we think about our conditioning, right? And everyone that's on this Zoom call, I salute you, because we are like-souled individuals, liked vibes, right? We are trying, I saw someone put it in there when it comes to awareness being a muscle. We're all kind of like in this gym class right now. This is what I consider it. And so we know that we have been trained, we have been hypnotized into viewing our body solely for the aesthetic pleasure of others and ourselves, right? We only look at it for how it pleases our sense of sight. And that's it. Instead of, and not to say that that has to be taken away, because you can enjoy the vision that is you. You know what I'm saying? Because that's how you end up like me, where you're super focused on the spirit, where you don't realize you can just have fun, like trying out different hairstyles, trying out a different lipstick. Like you can have fun with this canvas, right? But the same way how we want to be looked at as multi-layered individuals, right? A lot of us do not want to be looked at solely just for our profession, solely because we have like gorgeous eyes or lips or whatever. There's so much more to us. The body is the same way. The body to me is like, Tracy, you're underestimating me. You're looking at me as just a cute little doll that can be put to the side, that does not have a voice worth listening to, that can tell you in the moment sometimes what you need, right? On an energy level. So I realized if I just had pause, if I had the patience to listen, which is different from hearing. It's like, I hear the signals of a pain, so I'm like, oh, nope, let's close it out. No, I want to be distracted. I'm not here for it. But listening requires patience, requires stillness, requires presence. And yesterday, I fumbled because, you know, that's the fine print of being a human. Like, I am not here to position myself as better than anyone on this call. Not in the slightest. Like, I sit side by side with you ladies. I do not sit above you, and no one sits below me. But it was a nice reminder that I have to maintain this relationship with my body. And just like any relationship, it's maintained with communication, right? If we have a partner and we stop going on dates, you know, whether they're quarantine dates or whether you get to go outside and whatever social distance as at a restaurant, but carving that time for intentional listening really enhances a relationship. And then also, just like when someone comes home just on the casual and they're speaking, if you care, you listen. But we are literally living in the nucleus of distraction, where we have access to so many voices, and it makes it so easy to drown out the most important important voice. And so what has always been a challenge for me is getting out of this destination syndrome. Hold on just a second. Baby, I'm on a Zoom call, just a heads up. Okay. Communication. Living it out in the moment. So yes, so I always had destination syndrome, and it has shown up in so many different ways, but to stick with the body, let's just say a really easy example is when it comes to health, right? I'm sure many people can relate. You have a goal, you say, I wanna go to the gym and whatever, create this impact. And then it happens, woohoo, but we may forget the next step, which is the upkeep. Because it will slide down. And so that's the same thing with the communication. So yesterday I forgot in the moment. Sometimes it's easier to forget than it is to remember. And memory, again, is a muscle. It has to be practiced. You know, we have to put ourselves in some type of school. And although many of us have, you know, tricky relationships with school, but for me, what is beneficial about a school was that there was a schedule at all times, right? And so what I've learned with just paying attention to my body is usually in the afternoon, and I know this from studying, around 2 or 3, I start to get anxiety. Why? Because that's when I start doing my content creation. So when I remember that, I can get ahead of my anxiety and make sure that I have the necessary tools to keep me in check. I forgot in that moment, which is why I poured up a little something. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be drinking. Like, listen, man, I could take you to Cocktail City.
I love that you brought that up because, you know, I think about this sometimes in that, you know, like the body, the mind, all being connected. And speaking of anxiety, you know, there are times where I can be entirely safe in my home, but my brain is not telling me I'm safe.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, especially during COVID, man, every day I thought I was dying of COVID, you know? It's like, what are those tools? What are those tools to be able to connect the mind and body and manage that anxiety?
Yeah, I think there's several that you can try on because a tool is not a one size fits all type of deal. You know, you have to experiment with it. So for myself, one is just looking at myself through a physiological type of lens. So how am I breathing? That is the first check-in. You know, I'm sure the majority of us are familiar on some level with our parasympathetic system and then our sympathetic system. And one is for the fight, flight, or freeze. And usually when we take like big gulps of air through our mouth, we don't realize that we're heightening that side of things. But the parasympathetic system, a lot of times it can be looked at as like rest and digest, and it brings you, from what I've studied, to a sense of calm, is breathing through the nose slowly. And at first it feels very counterintuitive because a lot of times anxiety puts you in a state of urgency, which is why I may feel like, no, let me get these big gulps of air. But it kind of does make sense because if we want to get to the opposite state, then we do have to move slower. And that's what breathing through the nose does. And if someone out here is also just heavy on biology, I'm sure there's so much more that you could flex on. But that's the first thing I check in on myself with. The second thing that I may do, and I've spoken about this with my girls, to just be very, very rooted in the present, is check in with my senses. What can I feel right now? What is something I can hear right now? What is something I can see? What is something that I can taste, right? Because a lot of times with anxiety, we are either throwing ourselves into the future, flinging ourselves into a reality that has not yet arrived, And so that allows our imagination to just run wild, right? Or we are pedaling backwards at full speed, which is reliving another reality that is not the present, which has passed, of course, but is still not now. And so that's why I realized, okay, focusing on just my senses immediately can give me a sense of safety in the space that I'm in. Because in this moment, nothing is happening. And if there is something happening, then we have danger. And so there's a difference to me between fear and danger. And fear sometimes can be manipulated, can be concocted in our minds because of all these different narratives we are telling ourselves and that we are receiving without our consent from the media, from our friends, even if they may be well-intentioned, you know what I mean? But we're checking in with all these outside voices instead of our own, and not realizing that they have now crafted these different narratives that make us feel fearful. And danger to me can truly be spotted in the moment. Because if you are seeing, feeling, hearing, blah, 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 oh, snap, like I'm scared because I have this partner who is like punching the wall, you know what I mean, in the other room. Let me leave. And these are just examples. Of course, there's always going to be like outlier, and I'm not going to be able to get every single type of possible scenario, but just to kind of give you a feel. And then third, for myself, is affirmations. You know, reminding myself of my godliness, who the fuck I am, giving credit to how I'm feeling in the moment, because I do feel like all feelings should be respected. Even if, like, I'll look at sometimes anxiety as a overprotective parent, you know, who's just super concerned, might be even a little old-fashioned. So the new things of 2020 might terrify them because they can't relate to them, you know? And so if you have an overprotective parent, I recognize that it's coming from a place of love. You care so much, but my discernment I have to discern from fear and danger and speak to you with love. So honor that my body might be confusing, you know, creating a new podcast episode with like true danger, with like a bus speeding in my direction. You know what I mean? And so I have to listen to it, and for myself, like, talk to myself and be like, listen, I understand that you are feeling this way. I feel my heart rushing, right? I feel the sweat, even with my air conditioner on. I feel like I'm starting to sweat, my palms, right? My forehead. And I want you to know that we are safe for these reasons. X, Y, Z. You can go back to what you're seeing, what you're hearing, all of that, right? And that you may be confusing growth with danger. Or confusing danger with growth. Actually, that might make more sense. And so with an affirmation, like, for instance, what I've been telling myself recently is I'm not rushing to improve before beginning to accept. That's been important to me because I have to honor where I am currently. A lot of times, affirmations may actually work against us because it could potentially when you're crafting, you're super focused on your future version of you, that you reject this body, this being who is gonna take you there. You know what I mean? So that's why I'm like, okay, speaking to my emotions, where I'm at, meeting myself where I'm at, and noticing that I may be, even if I'm a grown ass woman, I'm in my 30s, but I can still be an infant in a new space. I'm doing something new. So psychologically, I am a child. And so when a child is doing something new for the first time, do we yell at them? And even if you tell yourself, well, I should have been known how to do this, or it's not moving along, like, we don't ever pressure a baby to get their first steps down in 3 minutes. And we celebrate those first steps, even when they're wobbly. Because it is the very first time we are honoring this child where they are at. We are not looking at this child and being like, when are you going to turn 21? And so that is, in my opinion, a conversation that can help the self. Because we, to me, are living so many different lives within one body. I had a conversation with a friend a couple weeks ago. We were having a social distance picnic, and she was just explaining how much she loves summertime, right? And the return of the flowers and like heirloom tomatoes and all these things. And she's like, I love when the flowers come back. And that's gorgeous. But those flowers aren't coming back. This is the welcoming of new flowers. The flowers from last summer, like, do not be mistaken, have died.
No.
You know what I mean? It's not a return. We have to welcome the newness of every state, even if it looks familiar. Even though those tomatoes look familiar, they are new tomatoes. You know? And so that's what I mean about ourselves, is you may be looking in the mirror all the time and you're like, dang, like there's no growth, there's blah, 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 but it's still a new you every single day.
I love that.
Yeah.
And I love how much of this summit, you know, when you think about how much women have been, when it comes to the conversation of safety, so much of it has been around rape and harassment and sexual assault, very, very important topics. But what I do love is how much of this conversation was about what we can control, which was self and the healing and the listening and doing the work. And, you know, we had amazing hosts who talked about knowing your rights and data online and these things, but over and over, a lot of it did come to yourself, your body, being connected to yourself, listening to yourself. And I think that that's really powerful because we can control that. And
yes, girl. Even if I can quickly make another point, because this is a high interest of mine right now. And I'm just learning a lot more from this woman named Alyssa Vitti, who's helping me with like cycle syncing. So even another part of like our departure from patriarchy is recognizing that as women, as cis women, we have two different clocks, you know? We have the circadian rhythm, which is how our body just adapts to when the sun is up and when the moon is down. And if you study like Chinese medicine, there's like different parts of your body. Like at this time, your like gallbladder might be this way or whatever. You can like go do more in depth. But yeah, so for the male hormonal cycle, it's 24 hours. And if I say anything, I'm still a student in this, y'all. So feel free to correct me if I have anything off, and you're a professor in this because I'm a student. But from, if memory serves me correct, the male body, the hormones reset every 24 hours. Yes. And so our society, our Western society, has been designed based off of the male body. So going back to women having two clocks, right? We have our circadian, which is just comes with the territory of being a human, right? Not dependent on gender, or I should say not dependent on sex. And then we have the, how do you pronounce this? The infradian rhythm, which has everything to do with our cycle. I'm not gonna call it menstrual cycle because we've just looked at our hormones only as when we bleed for the longest time.
Yeah.
But there's 4 phases actually when it comes to our hormones and their cycle. You know what I mean? Like, I know a lot of us are probably familiar with ovulation. We know that because that's closer to when we get our period. We know that's usually a great time if you want to have a baby, right? But many of us don't know about our luteal phase, our follicular phase, you know what I mean? And so all these different phases of the body actually offer us an opportunity to live a very balanced, holistic life where we can experience all these different things because the chemicals in your body are changing that make you more sensitive to certain things. And I mean sensitive right now as like a superpower, you know what I mean? Not a burden. But when we understand our bodies truly as women, then, you know, let's just give an example of your ovulation phase, right? And this goes back to mind-body connection because there's like literally and figuratively. So literally our bodies are like, okay, bitch, well, it's time to see if we can have a baby. So I'm gonna have you feeling yourself heavy. A lot of times when we're ovulating as women, we're hornier. You know what I mean? Now, because you can make decisions over your body. We are not animals in the sense where we do everything simply for survival and to create more children, right? We could do so many other things in this life. We can create for the sake of creating. You may not want to have children, but that energy of feeling yourself, of confidence, of being social is there. So what I'm studying is like during that time, that's when you ask your boss for a raise because you have an extra glow. You may not even realize it, but your chin is higher to the clouds than any other time in your cycle. This is the time where you're like, you know what? I've had this person on my list to like go for business for so long, but I felt intimidated, yada, yada, yada. But it's during your ovulation phase that you go do that. And then like, I know that we have been bred to believe that our menstrual cycle is disgusting and that it is just a heavy weight on us. And that can happen. And there's also different foods that we should be eating to further create like a flow versus like a backup, right? But also just on a psychological level, this allows us time to rest. And what's something that is usually most useful during a time of rest? Reflection. So like I'm learning during your menstrual cycle, that's a good time to check back in with your goals to see, am I on the right path? Because what are we doing? A lot of times, in my opinion, we have been scammed into saying things like, oh, anything a man can do, we can do. And I get that to a degree, but it's just do it different. Why do we want to become more like something that we have conversations about that's not good?
Right.
And so society has you thinking that everything that is organic to a woman, like our characteristics are weak. And sometimes we eat that storyline up. But it's not fucking true. It's just what was for so long. What was. And so I'm just here, along with you, Yelda, and all of these women here to create what is.
Amen.
AKA what always has been.
I love that. And, you know, I think this is such a beautiful way to wrap up. And I hope that, you know, the takeaway for all of us is that we don't have to, safety isn't just something that when we're in danger we should think about, but it's something that every day we can give ourselves tools and techniques and consciousness to feel safer, be preemptive about it. And I'm so honored to have the sisters that led us today